This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We were just talking at the end of the last hour about how radical chic has moved from Leonard Bernstein's Manhattan penthouse in 1970 to K-12 administrative offices in 2019. And Anthony Esselin, as he always does, has a great piece, this time in amgreatness.com, talking a little bit about the issue of social media censorship. The Constitution does not protect freedom of speech, writes Hasson. His point is that the Constitution can enshrine freedom of speech, but if Americans don't support it, if the culture turns against it, then the Constitution may be of little protection. And he also talks about the language used by officious commissars like that nuclear school superintendent that we were discussing, but there's so many. The chief equity officer, Candace Moore, that Mayor Lightfoot has instituted. He says of community, why appeal to it other than as a psychological hiccup? To shut down the expression of beliefs that those in power do not like. Hence, he's talking about his time at Providence College. Hence, it was that a professor of politics, while students nodded like puppets, delivered herself of the remarkable opinion that although the object of her public loathing of me enjoyed academic freedom, that freedom must be used responsibly, according to community standards. The inversion was complete. Someone who does not believe in objective moral truth, and who therefore in moral debates cannot use her academic freedom responsibly, condemns someone else who does believe in objective moral truth, who seeks it, who declares what he believes he has seen, and who therefore can have cause to speak of what is responsibly or irresponsibly done. It's this false notion of community. It's very much like George Will once said, the community of nations. Community of nations, it's a throwaway phrase. What exactly does sub-Saharan Africa have in common with Iceland? Community of nations. It's sort of a grade school way of talking about things when we don't want to stake out a position of objective truth, and that's Esselin's point. He goes on and he uses as a proxy for the social media chieftains, he uses the Piranha Brothers, which is a reference to Monty Python, which is a reference to the Cray brothers, these British gangsters, which was a Tom Hardy movie called Legend, by the way, about the Cray brothers. It was only okay. If you're going to see a Tom Hardy movie, you really want to see Tom Hardy's acting chops?
Yeah, what movie should I see? Or all of us?
Locke.
Locke?
L-O-C-K-E, Locke. The entire movie takes place in his car.
Really?
It's really good. But I digress. Back to Anthony Esselin. Hence, the Piranha Brothers will permit you to put your ignorance of religion and your contempt for religious people on full display all day long and every day of the week, social media. The spike will never penetrate your temple, but they will not permit you to say bluntly that a man who believes he is a woman is in the grip of a delusion. If someone complains, out you go, and out goes your community or your portion thereof. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Mary Rice Hasson. She is the Cato Byrne Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and the director of the Catholic Women's Forum. Mary Rice Hasson, please, thanks for joining us. Pleased to have you.
Thanks so much, Dan and Amy. Glad to be on.
So just building off what Anthony Esselin was talking about generally, and then he gave this specific example of trans orthodoxy here. You have a piece that you penned in the Federalist talking even more specifically about sort of the 5 new orthodoxies that are being imposed in K through 12 systems and in culture to try to mainline and normalize this idea that gender is a social construct.
Well, and also to pick up on Anthony Anthony Esselin's point, it's to shut down everyone else's right to be able to actually talk about the actual facts of the human body and our identities as male and female. That's going out the window, at least in the public schools.
And so give us a bit of a dissertation, if you will, on gender-inclusive puberty education.
Right. So there's a group called Gender Spectrum, which has a lot of influence. They work closely with both Planned Parenthood, with GLSEN, which is one of the LGBT advocacy groups. They work with the NEA, the ACLU, and they have come out with something that they call a gender-inclusive puberty education guide. And they offer 5 principles that should be overlaid onto sex education or health curricula in order to make those programs, quote, gender inclusive, particularly inclusive of transgender or non-binary identifying children. And what this means is it's putting this label, gender inclusive, on top of an ideology that allows them to just erase the scientific facts and to speak about puberty, which is completely grounded in our sexuality as male or female, to speak about those changes in our bodies, to teach children that puberty is just about sort of generic bodies that have parts, and male and female are nowhere part of the equation. So it's a crazy science-denying program, but this is what's being pushed under the guise of being LGBTQ inclusive, particularly in the schools.
So do you think that they're brainwashing our children?
Oh, I think, honestly, that's exactly it. It's giving them a false framework for who we are as a person. So in other words, when they're going through puberty, obviously there are bodily changes, but it's oriented towards our development as males or females towards sexual maturity so that we can reproduce. In other words, this is completely oriented, puberty is completely oriented around the reality of our bodies as male and female and the ability to reproduce as male and female, because our reproductive system is not complete. It's only complete when male and female come together. So this puts out this false idea that puberty is really just about, quote, becoming an adult, a generic adult, and that who you are depends on your feelings, your identity, so that you can have a man, or a boy who's becoming a man who has a uterus, which is a contradiction in terms. But so this is indoctrination by removing the reality-based framework of male and female and overlaying on top of that these concepts that just don't make sense, that we're bodies and we have parts, but there's no connect to who we are as male or female.
We're all just Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, right? You just put parts on and take them off.
Snap on, snap off. I think of Lego people the same way, as if all that remains in order to be a certain person is swap out certain body parts, totally ignoring our chromosomes, totally ignoring that who we are, and puberty itself is not something that's just genitally oriented. That starts in the brain. It affects our entire bodies. And so this is, it's just telling our kids a lie. And the reason they're putting forth this program is because there's been a lot of criticism lately, mounting criticism, of the push to transition young children at great cost, where if you put a 14-year-old girl, for example, on testosterone, she is likely to become infertile. Even before she's of the legal age to be having sex, she is likely to become infertile by taking these cross-sex hormones. So they're trying to make that okay by telling kids that kids go through puberty in different ways and require medical support, so that since bodies are not inherently male or female, if someone has to take hormones, that's perfectly normal, and that reproduction is no longer supposed to be centered around male, female coming together and producing a child, but that there are all these alternative ways. So they're trying to make it okay for children to take these cross-sex hormones that will sterilize them, to undergo surgery that will mutilate them, and to come to grips with the fact that they've lost their fertility by telling them it's okay. There are lots of other things we can do down the line. This is just another pathway to an adult body or to a family. It's really.
Where are the adults in the room to stop this? I mean, spreading misinformation, spreading lies.
Good question. So a couple of things to realize. One, these principles that Gender Spectrum is putting out are put forth as principles instead of as curricula. Why? Because curricula needs to be approved typically by a school board or a principal or things like that. So it's an end run. Anyone who embraces this can just sort of put it on top of your health curriculum, change the language, and there you go. The adults in the room, unfortunately, there are adults who are pushing transgender ideology with no regard for what is good for children. There are adults who are looking at their political goals, and they're not worried about the individual children. And I can tell you from talking with parents who have lost kids to this transgender ideology that having a child begin to take cross-sex hormones and as a parent not being able to do anything about that and to watch them get a mastectomy and not be able to stop that is one of the most harrowing, soul-destroying things a parent can go through. And this is more and more becoming the norm because we have this pretense that our children have autonomy and the schools are indoctrinating the kids into thinking this is a perfectly fine way to be. With no discussion of the pathologies that accompany it.
Well, and also too the outcomes, right? So there's never any kind of look back at the outcomes. We've talked to Walt Heyer, we've talked to Jamie Shoup, who transitioned back, and myriad examples of that. The other thing, though, is they won't let any research be done into consequences, and so the Brown University researcher who essentially concluded from a study that there's a social contagion aspect to this trans business.
Right.
Well, that has to be eliminated. That is research that is unacceptable because there is, and the fact that they have this curriculum and they're trying to get into the schools speaks to their knowledge that there's a social contagion, or else why are they trying to get into the schools to promote this? It's to make it more ubiquitous and to make it more acceptable and to frankly build another political coalition partner.
Exactly. And when you read interviews with the activists, when they're not trying to actually push something in the schools, and there are less guarded moments, they say they are exactly going towards the children and they want to change how they think. In other words, there's no pretense that they're just sort of respecting everyone's right to make their own decisions. They are putting forward this fake science as if it were true. And again, where are the adults? Where are our legislators? Where are people standing up and saying, no way, no way, let's teach our kids the truth.
And they're going after the kids to change the way they think. For what's the end game, though? What's the end game, in your view?
Well, I think there are two. One is political power, because the LGBT movement is very much part of the larger progressive movement, and so they want to get these kids early to be thinking along those lines. And so we see with the House having just passed the Equality Act, which now will have to go to the Senate, they want to make it so that it is politically unpalatable for anyone to oppose so-called equality, which really is just ramming an agenda down the throats of everyone in a way that is poisonous. You know, as you said, the results here are really tragic and toxic, not just for the kids who go through it, but for all the other kids who are forced to condone and to go along and to sort of play a part in this narrative that's just not true. They have to speak as if this were true. So if you care about free speech, you ought to care about this agenda. And if you care about kids' health and just bodily integrity, you ought to care that our kids are being told lies. So it's political power. It's pushing an agenda. It's also about marginalizing parents, because parents don't get a say in this conversation. It's just kids and administrators and health educators and sex educators talking directly to our kids and telling them something that's not true and is not aligned with the values of most parents.
She is Mary Rice Hasson, Cato Byrne Fellow in Catholic Studies at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Director of the Catholic Women's Forum. You can check out her piece, which I tweeted out at Dan Proft about the puberty inclusive gender education agenda at thefederalist.com as well. Mary Rice Hasson, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan. Amy, have a great day.
You too.
Yep. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636.